We got a call. You need to come with us for verification.
You need to leave. You have no warrant to be here.
I am recording this. Get your hands off him. That's assault.
Two ICE agents believed they held absolute authority. They possessed an address, an anonymous tip phoned in from a prepaid cell, and a controversial Department of Homeland Security directive they interpreted as granting them unchecked power to enter any residence without judicial oversight. But when Senior Agent Simeon Ortez and Agent Daniel Jefferson pushed open the unlocked door at 73 Maple Ridge Drive at 6:38 a.m. on January 30th, 2026, and crossed uninvited into the living room of Chief Harold Jackson, they set in motion a cascade that would culminate in federal convictions, 5-year prison sentences, the permanent destruction of their law enforcement careers, and a statewide legislative reform that would fundamentally alter how federal immigration enforcement operated across Texas. Jackson was no ordinary homeowner. He was police chief of Elmwood County, a 55-year-old veteran officer with 32 years of service, a graduate of the FBI National Academy, and a fourth-generation American whose family had established roots in Texas decades before either agent was born. His badge rested on the entry table. His credentials lay beside it. His unmarked police vehicle bearing municipal plates sat plainly visible in the driveway. None of it registered with the two men standing in his living room demanding immigration verification. Dr. Grace Jackson did not hesitate. The 53-year-old cardiothoracic surgeon lifted her phone, activated the camera in 4K resolution, and began narrating each constitutional violation with clinical precision as it unfolded in real time. Her voice remained steady as she documented the warrantless entry. Her lens captured the dismissiveness in Ortez's expression when he scoffed at her husband's assertions of authority. Her recording preserved the exact moment Ortez reached for Jackson's shoulder and declared him detained, 4 words that would echo repeatedly through a federal courtroom months later. Everyone claims that these days. Within 9 minutes, the FBI had been notified. Within 43 minutes, the Texas Attorney General's office had mobilized. Within 2 hours, the governor's legal team had begun preliminary briefings. The eventual settlement, $10.2 million, would become the largest individual ICE payout in state history. But the true cost extended far beyond financial compensation. It manifested in prison terms, obliterated reputations, careers reduced to cautionary tales, and a reckoning delivered far too late to those who had operated without consequence for years. If this story resonates with you, if you believe that documentation remains our most potent defense against institutional overreach, take a moment now. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a comment below, let me know where you're watching from, and whether stories like this matter to you. Your engagement ensures these accounts reach the people who need to hear them most. Maple Ridge Drive occupied a peaceful corner of Elmwood County's established residential quarter, streets lined with mature oaks, homes maintained with quiet pride. The kind of block where neighbors exchanged morning greetings and weekend gatherings had become tradition. Chief Harold Jackson had resided at number 73 for 18 years, raised 2 children there, hosted community barbecues that drew colleagues and friends from across the county, and departed each morning from the same driveway where his unmarked Ford Explorer now sat beneath the early morning shadows. The morning of January 30th arrived unremarkably. Pale light filtered through the windows as Jackson moved through his pre-shift routine. Coffee brewed in the kitchen. His uniform hung pressed in the bedroom. His wife prepared for her own schedule at the hospital. The rhythms of an ordinary Thursday before dawn. Then the front door opened without warning. Agents Ortez and Jefferson entered as if crossing a threshold already breached. No knock preceded their arrival. No announcement of authority or purpose. Their tactical vests bore the ICE insignia in bold letters across chest and back, catching the slant of morning sun as they stepped into the living room. Ortez moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to compliance. Jefferson followed half a step behind, younger, less certain, but committed to the trajectory his superior had set. Jackson stood near the sofa, coffee mug suspended mid-motion. He registered their presence instantly, the uniforms, the posture, the presumption, and set the mug down with deliberate calm. His body shifted slightly, positioning himself between the intruders and his wife across the room. No sudden movements, no aggression. Just the controlled adjustment of someone who had spent 3 decades managing crisis situations. Dr. Grace Jackson's hand moved to her phone. Ortez spoke first. Immigration status required verification. An anonymous report had been filed. Federal authority superseded local jurisdiction. The language arrived, clipped, procedural, stripped of courtesy. He gestured toward Jackson as if the man before him existed only as a subject requiring processing. Jackson's response came measured, precise. He identified himself as chief of police, indicated his badge on the nearby table, pointed to the credentials beside it, noted the marked vehicle in the driveway visible through the front window. Each detail presented calmly, without elevation, the tone of someone explaining self-evident facts to individuals who should already comprehend them. Ortez dismissed it all with a wave. Documentation could be fabricated, badges purchased online, vehicles borrowed. He cited the disputed DHS directive as if reading from a script he had internalized long ago, a memo that supposedly granted agents discretion to pursue verification regardless of presented identification, regardless of circumstance, regardless of constitutional constraint. The tension crystallized, not explosive, not loud, just the slow tightening realization that authority was colliding with arrogance, and neither side intended to yield. Dr. Jackson's camera captured everything. Her voice, steady and clinical, began its narration. She identified the agents by the names visible on their vests. She noted the absence of a warrant. She documented their refusal to acknowledge her husband's credentials. She recorded the moment Ortez stepped closer, his hand extending toward Jackson's shoulder. Detained, pending verification. Jackson did not resist, did not argue further. He simply stood, drawing on reserves built across decades of navigating spaces where his authority had been questioned, his competence doubted, his presence challenged in ways his white colleagues never experienced. He had learned patience as survival, composure as strategy, the ability to endure dismissal while maintaining absolute control. Dr. Jackson's thumb moved across her phone screen. The smart home system received its silent command. No audible alarm, no visible panic. Just a sequence of signals transmitted to the county dispatch center 9 miles away. Ortez's hand closed on Jackson's shoulder. The contact lasted 3 seconds, long enough for the camera to capture, long enough to constitute battery under Texas law, long enough to transform a warrantless entry into an assault on a law enforcement officer. The first siren cut through the morning quiet 4 minutes later. County deputies arrived in rapid succession. 3 vehicles, 6 officers. They recognized the address before exiting their cars, recognized the unmarked Explorer, recognized the situation's wrongness before stepping through the still open door. The living room tableau shifted instantly. Ortez and Jefferson, suddenly surrounded, suddenly outnumbered, found their presumed authority dissolving as local law enforcement encircled them with weapons holstered but hands ready. The deputies' expressions registered disbelief, then anger, then the cold professionalism of officers confronting a line that should never have been crossed. Jackson's voice emerged quiet but absolute. The agents were to be detained. Charges would include unlawful entry, refusal to produce a warrant, and battery on a sworn officer. The county officers moved without hesitation, directing Ortez and Jefferson to place hands behind their backs, reading rights in voices that carried no room for negotiation. The power had not shifted, it had been reclaimed. Within 7 minutes, the FBI field office in Dallas received notification. Within 12, federal agents were en route. The scene secured, methodically, evidence logged, statements recorded, Dr. Jackson's phone secured as critical documentation. The video would be duplicated, time-stamped, entered into chain of custody before the morning ended. Ortez and Jefferson stood in custody as unmarked federal vehicles pulled to the curb. The neighborhood, awakened by sirens, gathered at careful distances. Witnesses to an intrusion that had begun in arrogance and ended in handcuffs. FBI personnel entered the Jackson home, reviewed the footage on site, and confirmed what local officers already knew. This was not an immigration matter. This was a federal civil rights violation unfolding in high definition. The agents were transported separately. The investigation, already accelerating, would uncover layers neither had anticipated. But in that moment, as morning light strengthened and the Jacksons' home returned to an uneasy quiet, the foundation had been laid. Evidence secured, authority restored. The machinery of accountability beginning, its slow, inexorable turn toward consequences long overdue. The FBI assumed control within the hour. Special Agent Trent Holloway arrived from the Dallas field office with a team of 3 digital forensics equipment already configured for immediate deployment. Dr. Jackson's phone passed into evidence custody, its contents extracted and replicated across secure servers before noon. The footage played on a laptop in the Jacksons' dining room, federal agents leaning close to catch every detail rendered in sharp 4K clarity. Ortez's face, Jefferson's hesitation, the casual dismissal, the hand on Jackson's shoulder. Everyone claims that these days. 4 words, 17 frames. A statement that would anchor the prosecution's case and echo through depositions, hearings, and ultimately a federal courtroom where jurors would hear it replayed until the contempt became undeniable. The investigation expanded rapidly. Holloway's team traced the anonymous tip within 6 hours. The prepaid phone had been purchased at a pharmacy 12 miles from Maple Ridge Drive. Security footage showed the buyer, a woman in her late 60s, nervous movements, cash transaction, facial recognition software, cross-referenced municipal databases. Catherine Allen. Residence, 71 Maple Ridge Drive, 2 houses down from the Jacksons. The irony materialized during the search of Allen's home. Investigators discovered her own audio recording device, a dated voice-activated unit positioned on her front porch, ostensibly for security, but angled directly toward the Jackson property. Timestamps on the device's memory card coincided precisely with the morning of January 30th. She had intended to capture the chaos. Instead, she had documented her own complicity. Allen's interrogation unfolded over 3 sessions. Initial denials crumbled beneath evidence. She admitted the call, admitted using the prepaid phone, admitted her motivations, crystallized from years of resentment toward the Jacksons' prominence in what she termed a traditionally established neighborhood. Her language, carefully chosen at first, eventually betrayed the prejudice beneath. Gatherings that drew too many unfamiliar faces, professional success that seemed disproportionate, a visibility that disturbed her sense of order. But the deeper revelation emerged during the second session. Forensic analysis of Allen's laptop uncovered her activity on an encrypted forum, a white nationalist platform where users shared tactics for disrupting communities they deemed threatened by demographic change. Posts targeting prominent minority figures, strategies for anonymous reporting, disinformation designed to amplify personal resentments into actionable hostility. Allen had not acted alone. She had been radicalized slowly, fed narratives that transformed envy into ideology, then ideology into the phone call that brought federal agents to a police chief's door. The hidden network behind seemingly isolated acts now had a digital trail. While Allen's culpability surfaced, Ortez's history underwent systematic excavation. ICE personnel records revealed an 8-year pattern. 189 incidents across upscale suburbs in 4 Texas counties. Affluent Black and Latino residents targeted for immigration verification. 0 legitimate cases, 0 deportations, 0 valid outcomes. Just harassment documented in terse incident reports that supervisors had signed without question. Email archives told the fuller story. Correspondence between Ortez and colleagues normalized the practice. Casual jokes about quotas. Complaints about uppity targets who cited constitutional rights. Justifications framed as border security when the targets lived hundreds of miles inland and possessed citizenship documented across generations. Agency complacency had not merely enabled Ortez, it had validated him. Agent Jefferson, facing charges as an accessory, made his calculation quickly, cooperation in exchange for leniency. His testimony, delivered across 4 debriefings, dismantled the fiction of isolated misconduct. He described Ortez's mentorship, fabricated success stories, exaggerated threat assessments, pressure to participate in operations that skirted legal boundaries. Jefferson had sensed wrongness but suppressed doubt to avoid conflict with a senior agent whose confidence seemed unshakable. The grooming had been methodical, the corruption systemic. The federal trial convened in Dallas 7 months later. 7 days of proceedings compressed into a narrative that felt both expansive and suffocating. Dr. Jackson's video played in its entirety on day 2, then again on day 4, then in segments during closing arguments. Jurors watched Ortez's hand reach for Jackson, watched the sneer, watched the casual assumption that authority derived from uniform rather than law. Expert witnesses dissected the pattern. A former federal prosecutor outlined how Ortez's history demonstrated racial bias codified into operational practice. A constitutional scholar explained Fourth Amendment violations in language that left no ambiguity. Jefferson testified for 6 hours, his voice flat, recounting how Ortez had constructed a parallel framework where personal prejudice masqueraded as enforcement discretion. The defense argued overreach, misunderstanding, adherence to flawed but official guidance. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing arrived 2 weeks later. Ortez received 5 years in federal prison, lifetime prohibition from law enforcement, employment, mandatory restitution. Jefferson, credited for cooperation, received 18 months and probation. Allen, prosecuted separately for false reporting and conspiracy, faced probation, mandatory bias education, community service. Her punishment, minimal in comparison, carried its own weight, a public record that would follow her, a cautionary tale about ideology nurtured in digital shadows until it manifested in destructive action. Do you think everyday recordings like Dr. Jackson's could be the key to exposing hidden networks of bias? Type capture in the comments if you agree, or share why you believe documentation empowers change. Throughout the trial, Jackson's presence remained understated. He attended each session, seated in the gallery, his expression neutral. But behind the scenes, his influence mobilized. Years of quiet mentorship across agencies, relationships built while navigating the discrimination that had slowed his career advancement now activated. Colleagues he had trained, supervisors he had advised, officers who owed their positions to his advocacy despite institutional resistance. They made calls, applied pressure, testified when needed. The network, invisible until now, revealed itself as force multiplier in the push toward accountability. The settlement announcement came 1 month post-verdict, $10.2 million. The figure made headlines, but the Jacksons redirected every dollar, funding for minority officer recruitment programs, anti-bias training curricula developed by independent consultants, body camera technology for departments across the state, not a cent retained personally. The money became infrastructure for change rather than compensation for violation. Texas lawmakers, already watching, moved with unusual speed. The settlement's magnitude, combined with media coverage that framed the case as systemic failure rather than isolated incident, created political urgency. Jackson's network, his allies in municipal, county, and state agencies, provided technical expertise for drafting legislation that balanced enforcement necessity with constitutional constraint. The reforms, inevitable now, waited only for formal enactment. The Jackson Integrity Act passed the Texas legislature 4 months after sentencing. The vote margin surprised no one familiar with the case's trajectory, overwhelming bipartisan support driven by public pressure, institutional embarrassment, and the quiet lobbying of law enforcement professionals who recognized the existing framework's failures. The legislation mandated federal-state coordination for immigration enforcement actions, warrants required for residential entries, independent audits of ICE operations within state borders, bias training modeled on curricula funded by the Jackson settlement, penalties for agencies that failed compliance. The reforms were not symbolic. They carried enforcement mechanisms, budget allocations, oversight structures designed to survive political transitions and bureaucratic resistance. Implementation began immediately. ICE revised operational protocols across Texas. Field offices instituted review boards. Supervisors faced quarterly audits examining patterns and targeting decisions. Within 18 months, unwarranted residential entries dropped 78%. The statistic, tracked by the State Attorney General's office and reported in annual assessments, validated the legislation's impact while acknowledging how broken the system had been. The settlement's funded programs expanded in parallel. Minority recruitment initiatives placed 214 new officers across municipal and county departments in the first 2 years. Anti-bias training became mandatory continuing education for all Texas law enforcement, with completion tracked and noncompliance triggering license review. Body camera adoption reached 93% of departments statewide. Footage retention policies standardized to prevent selective deletion. The reforms radiated beyond their immediate scope. Other states examined Texas's model. Federal agencies adjusted internal policies preemptively to avoid similar legal exposure. The case became training material, not just the video, which circulated widely, but the investigation's methodology, the trial's documentation, the settlement's strategic allocation. Jackson's experience transformed from personal violation into institutional cautionary tale, the kind of precedent that reshapes assumptions about acceptable practice. Media coverage sustained attention longer than typical civil rights cases. The video's clarity left no room for competing narratives. The forum connection added layers that resonated with ongoing concerns about online radicalization. Allen's minor punishment sparked debate about accountability for those who weaponize systems against marginalized communities. Ortez's history exposed how agencies protect problematic personnel until external pressure forces reckoning. Jackson returned to duty 3 weeks post-trial. His address to the Elmwood County Department, delivered in the same conference room where he had briefed officers for decades, focused on lessons rather than grievance, authority derived from law, not assumption. Power required restraint, not demonstration. Constitutional protections existed precisely for moments when expedience tempted override. The speech, recorded and distributed through training channels, became reference material for academies statewide. Dr. Jackson resumed her surgical practice, though her phone's footage had made her unexpectedly prominent. She declined most interview requests but agreed to participate in a documentary examining documentation as resistance. The film, released 14 months after the incident, used her narration as through-line connecting cases where civilian recordings had exposed misconduct. It won awards. More importantly, it became curriculum. Allen's connection to the extremist forum prompted federal investigation beyond her individual case. The platform's operators, traced through server records and financial transactions, faced charges for conspiracy and incitement. The network's scope forums, encrypted chats, coordinated harassment campaigns revealed infrastructure designed to amplify isolated resentments into collective action. Prosecutions unfolded slowly, but the exposure disrupted recruitment, scattered membership, forced the network's remnants deeper underground, where operational effectiveness degraded. The broader impact registered in metrics and anecdotes. Complaint filings against ICE in Texas declined 61% in the 2 years post-legislation. Community trust surveys, conducted by academic researchers tracking reform effectiveness, showed measurable improvement in minority residents' willingness to report crimes and cooperate with investigations. The changes were not universal systemic problems resisted quick resolution, but trajectories shifted in measurable ways. Jackson's underdog arc, invisible for decades, finally surfaced in retrospectives examining the case. Profiles detailed his career promotions delayed, competence questioned, authority undermined in ways white colleagues never experienced. He had endured by building alliances quietly, mentoring others who faced similar barriers, creating networks that operated beneath institutional notice until circumstances demanded their activation. The morning of January 30th had not created his resilience. It had revealed reserves cultivated across 32 years of navigating spaces designed to exclude him. The narrative's viral resonance, millions of views across platforms, sustained engagement, shares that transcended typical social media life cycles derived from convergence. The footage's undeniability, the twist that kept unfolding, the justice delivered not just symbolically but concretely through prison sentences and legislative change. The story satisfied narrative expectations while documenting real-world stakes, offering both catharsis and evidence that accountability, though difficult, remained possible. Evening descended on Maple Ridge Drive as summer approached. The Jacksons hosted their annual gathering, neighbors and colleagues filling the backyard as they had before January 30th. Conversations flowed easily. Children played in the fading light. The normalcy felt earned rather than assumed, resilience demonstrated through continuation rather than retreat. Jackson stood near the grill, his presence no longer requiring assertion. The reforms bearing his name operated across the state. The settlements programs trained new officers. The legislation mandated protections that would outlast individual cases. Personal violation had catalyzed structural change, not because justice was inevitable, but because documentation, networks, persistence, and a legal system willing to enforce its own principles had aligned at the necessary moment. The sun set over Elmwood County, shadows lengthening across the grass, voices rising in laughter and conversation. The reforms would require vigilance to maintain. The networks would need continued cultivation. The work, never finished, continued in the ordinary rhythms of a community gathering on a summer evening, marking not an ending but a shift in what authority could no longer ignore. The story, already circulating, would reach audiences who needed its lessons. The precedent, now established, would guide cases yet to emerge. And the quiet strength that had sustained one man through decades of being underestimated would persist, embedded now in systems designed to prevent the next intrusion before it began.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it. And let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.